Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time so that you can grow and protect your net worth and your net happiness. I am Chris Snook, and today I am with Lori Van Dusen of LVW Advisors. Lori, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
So you just went through a couple different life things. You just moved houses or got rid of one. You're an avid runner. You write books about grace and running a business with grace, and there's all these metaphors. I'm really excited to get to know and unpack you. So talk to us a little bit about your backstory and then what you're doing today, and we'll get right into it.
Sure. I started on Wall Street. I was hired technically by Lehman Brothers in the late 80s. But at the time, Lehman Brothers split off into Shearson. So I basically was broker. And I was the only woman in a class of about 300 in the World Trade Center. I didn't know when I arrived there. I was very young. It was my second job. So my first job was selling copiers. And I think that's really funny because I'm watching a show right now where this guy, it's Patrick Dempsey. He's a killer for hire. And his cover story is that he's selling copiers. He drives around in a Porsche. Anyway, that's what I started out doing. Taught me a lot about sales, taught me a lot about interacting with different people and solving problems when, at the time, the Japanese were kicking our butts in America. And we were not the best technology. We were more expensive. And you had to just go in and go deep with people and understand, what their problems were. And it sounds like a stupid job, but I was selling ultimately because I was successful. I was really young. I ended up selling those huge duplicators that filled up a room and replacing print shops. So I would go into commercial printers because I was successful. They kept giving me tougher territories. So they said, you're going to go in and sell duplicators to commercial printers. Basically, their life's work putting that out of business. And I ended up doing that, kind of convincing these commercial printers that this was a better way for them to do what they were doing. It was more efficient, ultimately cheaper, took less people. And so that part of my life was like less than 2 years. And then I thought, I have enough skill now, coming out of college and graduate school, I can go to Wall Street. I always wanted to do this. So when I landed at Lehman Brothers and then Shearson, and was the only woman there. I'm going to correct that. There was one other woman, but 3 years later, I think there were 30 people left. And I was...
Was this when American Express owned them? And was this
American Express? No, that was after. I'm trying to remember this. And then after that, it was ultimately Citigroup. It was Smith Barney. I was always in the same place. So we had all these iterations of different companies, but I wish I would have saved all my business cards. But it started out as Shearson Lehman, ultimately Smith Barney that Citigroup owned, and then Morgan Stanley. Okay. And so right before the Morgan Stanley merger, I basically left and formed my own company.
Were you there during the RJR deal or no? Was that before?
No, I think that was right before. That would have been, I want to say, I could be wrong with this, in the 80s. Yeah.
When you said you started in the 80s, I was curious if...
87. I started, my first day basically was Black Monday. And I was on the trading floor that day and I didn't know anything and people were screaming and there was all kinds of pandemonium, and I leaned over to the guy next to me and just said, does this always happen? Because I had no idea what was going on. The market was crashing. So it was great timing on my part because I didn't have a business. So I didn't have anything to lose. And I'd come off this short career with Xerox selling copiers, but I was trained by them in Leesburg, Virginia. It was great training. And it's been kind of I realize it's been informative to me my entire life in this business because what stuck with me, so I went to Harvard before selling copiers. So one thing I always say to my kids and people who want to know about, can I get into this career in finance? What kind of background do I need? I'm like, look, I didn't have a finance degree. I had a graduate degree in education from Harvard. It was all about like working harder than everybody else in problem solving. And what Xerox taught me at Leesburg, which was their big training facility, was understand the situation, understand the problems people are having, and what are the implications of those problems. So then that gets you to what are their needs. And they had an acronym for it called SPIN: situation, problem, implication, need. And they're like, this is a formula, and it sounds cheesy, but if you think about it, how many people spend the time to ask the questions to get to what someone really needs versus trying to sell them something or solve for a problem they don't have, or solve for the wrong problem? Or, one of the things I learned in graduate school at Harvard, it's part of the case study method, is that the problem as presented is rarely the problem. So you have to just go deep with people and sometimes you need to be able to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people aren't. So
I love framework. I mean, anyone who's a fan of the newsletter or the show knows I barf all kinds of different frameworks and acronyms, and some of them are mine, a lot of them are borrowed or learned along the way like that. I love the SPIN acronym. The reality is it's a very apropos context for today's conversation, and I'd love for you to kind of talk to us about the work you're doing at the advisory firm today, and when you started that and how it's evolved. But also as it relates to that base level SPIN, the situation, the problem, the implementation, and the need, or like those things today, I think are very accurately not being discussed at a simplified level. I think the complexity is so big we forget that, and people are just kind of paralyzed in the current market, the current dynamic, and the AI versus humanity kind of construct. There's a lot of that, and people just need a simple kind of framework to hang on to and almost put these things in containers so they can figure out what they need.
Yeah, while it does, again, sound like a cheesy acronym, if you really think through it, it's very powerful if you're able to learn how to do that. Mostly it's learning how to ask questions, listen, and put together, what the person is telling you in a way that's important to them. If you're able to do that, you really can drive consensus too. So I think one of the things that has made me successful early on, I started when I was I started cold calling, but then it went into my first large client was pretty early on from a cold call. And that client was family that had sold a business to Unilever. And they said to me at one point, what you do is really not done in these boards that we sit on. And we give away money here and there, and nobody does this in the institutional space. So long story short, I started doing the same thing I was doing as an advisor for not-for-profits, and realized I had no competition at the time. Like nobody was going into a room. People were selling stuff, putting portfolios together. Larger institutions they had some resources inside to manage the money and look at their financial implications, but they didn't have anybody really pulling it all together as a fiduciary. And there was no one there that could sit in a room and bring various people who are sitting on a board or an investment committee or a finance committee together around an agreement. So SPIN is like, I didn't think I'd be talking about SPIN today, but SPIN is really important because you'd have to understand, like, why are people not agreeing? What is this person's, what is the hill they want to die on? What's the most important thing to them? You had to understand, like, sometimes the best communication occurs outside of the boardroom. It doesn't occur in front of everyone else. It's a lot of what's going on in our world today. It's applicable as you say, to a lot of things. It's applicable to like talking to my kids who are young men who are in a world where, they went to college, they're pretty skilled. I, won't sound objective describing them, but, one of my sons has left a job and he's looking for a job right now. And he's got a lot of skill. But I said, the best thing you have, two things you have going for you that are going to stand out. One, you work harder than everyone else. And two, you're emotionally intelligent. So I think, that is what spin's all about. It's what, people have to be able to, this has been said, so this is not an original thought of mine, but AI is not going to replace jobs. AI is going to replace the people that don't know how to use it to their advantage or to make themselves more productive. In our field, our people who are on the technical side, how do you get them to use whatever tools to become more productive? So not necessarily in their role, but other people that are front-facing advisors have more time in front of the client, and we're being more proactive, and we're solving bigger problems, and we're solving more integrated wealth problems. That's what AI can do for us. So it's not about, I don't really worry about all the jobs it's going to displace. What I would be worried about if I were looking for a job is, how can I really learn this and use it to my advantage?
Yeah, I think there's a different, I like that we're talking about the EQ side of things, because there is what happens and then there's the impact of what happens. And usually those two things don't finish at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Because humans make meaning out of things, right? That's what we are really great at, is we make everything mean stuff. And sometimes we make it mean something great, and sometimes we make it mean something wrong, or sometimes, but we make meaning out of it. And that's a uniquely human trait. And a machine doesn't make a meaning out of it. It executes an order, essentially. Like, it has a goal,
Correct.
and it finds the path to get to that goal. And it doesn't lament or celebrate the process beyond that, right? Like, once it executes, it's on to the next goal.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make a meaning out of it. And so why I bring that up is because we spent, the thing that people are talking a little bit about, but I think we're not really contextualizing as humans, as parents, as leaders of companies or people working inside of them, is the fact that we spent the last 15, 20 years kind of over-indexing on education being around STEM and like all these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
This,
Right.
and we drove the cost of higher education through the moon with all these different incentives. And we don't need to go into the mechanics of that, because you and I could nerd out for hours on that and bore everybody. But the reality is that these kind of things that we prioritized and that we almost idolized and said that's the ticket, we did that for multiple decades, and we did it with a big chunk of free money, right? So we kind of changed the game as far as the capital supply, because we had basically risk-free capital. So we could drive all these valuations and all these things up. And now we're in a world where we basically have not a tool, we have a ubiquitous thing called intelligence that we have just commoditized. So we basically said, for the last 15 years, go become intelligent and learn how to do these IQ things. Right. And then inside of 36 months, if you want to look back to like March of 23 till now, and then in the last 6 days, we basically just went, none of that matters.
None of that matters. What you just spent, 4 years, and you have student debt around and everything else. We can do all that now in 2 minutes.
And I think, if you were a machine, you'd go, okay. And you would just go to, well, what can I do, right? Like, you just go, okay, great. So that doesn't have to happen anymore. Now I do this. But we're not machines. We're humans. And so what happens is we are frustrated. We're angry. We lose trust. We already had trust decaying, right, for the last 15 years. If you look at Edelman's trust barometer, like we have, and so there's this real kind of pendulum that's on the emotional level, and it's at a societal scale. And this adds one more, straw to that camel's back. And that's kind of what I think about. Like, when I think about that, I don't worry, like you said, I don't really worry about opportunity. The opportunity is unprecedentedly bigger than ever before in history. But what you can't do is you can't take someone who is basically completely numbed out, shut down, or nihilistic and point them at opportunity, because that's not where they
Yes.
want to be. And so we have to deal with this impact, and we have to kind of find a way to like I don't want to say coddle, but we got to like find a way to just help people deal with the impact and get them
You
back to
do. Yeah,
focus on that. So, that's
totally,
yeah.
totally agree. It's I think disillusioned a lot of people. I think, there are certain real world impacts of all of this technology over the last, however, it's not just since the advent of AI, which is huge. It's before that. Like we have taken away, we'll go back to the cheesy spin element. We've taken away the ability for humans to learn how to do that, to find a common ground with each other, to debate respectfully, to just get to really understand intimately someone's needs and how people can be different but still really live in the same place and get along. And I that's the stuff that I think about. I think that's had a huge negative impact on our society, and we got to figure out a way to get back to being what's best about being human, and to
I
your
think,
point. So
I think it's so interesting you started out selling copiers, because I think the advantage of us, being old enough to remember an analog world is those first couple jobs, especially if you ended up in whatever finance or an entrepreneurship or whatever. A lot of times along the way, somewhere you learned how to sell somebody something.
yes,
Whether it was Cutco knives or whether it was lotion,
Cutco knives, yeah.
whether it was, I was knocking on doors in 1999 selling small business websites, right, to people like real estate firms, and no one wanted them, right? Like, knock on a door. You want a website? No, we got a Yellow Page ad. We have a bench
Yeah,
ad.
if you can sell the stuff nobody wants, you've learned a skill, right? That is transferable.
And I think what was important about that we benefited from, that we need to find a new way of doing it for this generation and for the generation behind it, is like you ate rejection for breakfast. Like, for 6 months I got no, 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 because I was terrible. Like, I had all the energy, I had all the enthusiasm, I had none of the skills, none of the frameworks. I didn't know really how to do it. I was just excited, and so I didn't have the skill. I had the right attitude, and then when the skill caught up, then I became deadly, right? Because then I had the attitude and the skill. But it took a long time for me to learn that skill. But the thing that it taught me was the rejection. It got easier each time. Like, I hated it in the beginning, but I just kind of knew I needed to get over it. I still don't like being told no. Like, I will keep talking until you say yes eventually, but I can accept no. What I hate now is maybe, right? So good salespeople, like, they
Yes.
hate maybe. It's like, hey, tell me no, tell me yes, tell me no. But
Or
maybe,
tell me, let's unpack the maybe. Why is it maybe?
yeah, like, my job's to get you to one of these two endpoints here.
Yes.
You got to make a
Well, it's
decision.
true. It's like, the analogy in my mind is apathy is like the worst thing. It's either a yes or a no, but the in between, if you get the in between, you have to ask why, and I think a lot of people, they don't want to hear no. They don't want to fail. They
Right.
don't want to really get their hands dirty. We've created this to a certain degree. So I wrote a book a few years ago, and a big part of the book, and he referenced it, but a big part of it was leaning into failure and loss and learning how to put one foot in front of the other. And you realize that you can become more resilient if you do that. So we've kind of gotten away from that, and our society has created this, you don't really have to get your hands dirty. You don't really have to, you don't have to fail. You know what? Failure is just, it's a part of life. Everyone will fail. All of us will go through hardship. I mean, I never would want to repeat some of the things that have happened to me. Never. But I've learned a lot. And the one thing that I have coached people on is, in business, when you fail, and you could more powerfully probably use this in relationships. But you have to step back and say, well, why was it? And do a postmortem on it. Don't just move on to the next thing either, because you'll repeat it.
Yeah.
You'll repeat it.
Yeah. I like to say I've never made the same mistake twice, but I've made a different version of it a
Yeah,
couple of different times, right? Because you think, oh, I learned that lesson, and then it comes at you a different way, and you don't contextualize it the same, and so boom, there you are, and whatever, and you go, God, why is
it's
this
uncomfortable to examine it though, but you have to
yeah.
examine it.
Well, I
So,
think so I'm curious about, how you're approaching the relationship with, your own team as well as your clients. Probably some similarities there, probably or not, as it relates to, re-engaging the themes around spin, or just re-engaging some of the stuff you wrote about in your book as it relates to the empathy side. Like, how do you systematically do that? And what have you learned, as you're navigating this, as a parent and as a professional that other people could maybe benefit from?
well, I think, there's in finance and in all businesses, there's, the difference between creating like a practice almost, and then a business, and then maybe an enterprise where the founder can step out and people can kind of carry it on. And it's been kind of my lifelong mission, really, since I had children and I was in finance. I had to figure out ways to mentor people and coach them. And so sitting in the room with, people on your team and teaching them what is super important, because and putting it into process. And a lot of what we do as advisors is all about empathy. You have empathy, driving consensus. It's all goes back to, the cheesy acronym, but it's all teaching people how to do that. And also teaching people what you said earlier, that a no is just an invitation for you to ask more questions or try to go deeper with somebody. So with the way I think I continue this business without me is for me to continue to teach, look at it and say, okay, what is most vulnerable about the business if something happens to me today? And I stress test it all the time and think about, where are we, where are our weaknesses? Where are the things that, if something happens to any key person, we need to solve for that. So as a founder and somebody who ultimately will step out of this business, you have to think that way. You have to teach people. And our business is all about people. So again, I think AI could be the most wonderful thing for our business, but it's really teaching people how to connect and solve problems that are complex. And most people in our space, the kinds of clients that we attract that are our kind of best fit clients, they have complicated lives, and I have a complicated life. You want the person or the team that's going to help make your life easier. Not everything fits in a neat financial box. Not everything is an investment solution. Sometimes people need help with their children. Sometimes people need to help us. They need us to help them to figure out how to step out of a business or to stay in it. There's so many aspects of wealth that we deal with, but it all is very human and it all is very different. There's no quick model portfolio. There's no easy answer. So I think we can use all these tools to make us more productive. But I think what sets us apart is that there is not one answer that fits everybody. And you have a team that can go where you want to meet the client, where they're at and solve for what they really need, not what you want to give them to make your life easier.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why, there's a lot of industries that I think are going to be reinvigorated, not reinvented, but reinvigorated maybe as they're reinvented. And I think financial services is one of them. It's long overdue. But the fiduciary movement inside of financial services, which started, whatever that was, 15, 20 years ago, kind of in a real material way, I think is now getting to the place where it really can be reinvigorated and become the new standard at a different way. Because at the end of the day, like you said, a lot of things can manage my money. A lot of things can, and there's, by the way, there's no human that's going to outpick the best AI, right? And so if that's really what my end game is, then there's a tool for that. And I can either afford it or I can't. And the people that can afford the best tools are the ones that we all know about, and they're the ones who make all the rules anyway, and everybody else is just along for the ride. But most people, that's not their reality. Their reality is I worked however long I worked, doing whatever I could. I socked away, put away for myself, for my family, for whatever I can, whatever that means to them, legacy, whatever that means. And they want to pass it down, and they usually don't want that to go to a government.
Right.
Like, it's really that simple. And so when it's that simple, you go, well, what do I need an advisor for? Well, I need an advisor for all the other things, all the other conversations, all the other questions I have. Well, you can go to AI for that. Yes, you can, which will make you more informed on all the base level questions that you waste time with your advisor on, so that you can actually have the meaningful, deep one.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the unlock, is that, again, spin will become new again. And not to overbeat that, because I know you didn't plan on, but it is so relevant because when situationally now people can enter a conversation more empowered, and they can do the work in private. They don't have to kind of like put on the face of like, well, I want to look good for Lori, and I want to make sure that, she thinks I'm a good client. And when they can come in with reams of whatever they ask their local AI or whatever they ask their favorite frontier model, and they can have some clarity and be empowered. Now they can come and say, well, I know I can do these kind of things, but here's my problem. Johnny, my son, like, I don't want to, disable them from their own work and blah, blah, blah. Or my wife and I are two totally different people. And I need to reverse engineer every aspect of the thing. And she wants to see the icing on the cake, so that it's safe and secure and stable and legal. And
that's perfect. Those are perfect examples. I mean, that's something you're not going to turn over to technology. That's very human.
No, and or an avatar, because even as the avatars get better and better, and they will, and we can't tell the difference between one, there is something that happens. I think the in-person meeting becomes a thing again. I think, a lot of these things start to have bigger value, right? They become the new scarcity.
I think that's so true. I mean, we were just having this conversation the other day with a couple people on my team. When, our businesses, it used to be almost fully institutional, like not-for-profits, colleges, universities. And now it's kind of 35% institutional, and the rest is families, multi-generational wealth. The in-person meetings are the most valuable, and it's really hard because every meeting involves more than one person in our business. So multiple family members or board members. It's very hard to drive consensus or get nonverbal cues if you're not in a room. It's really hard. It's very it's so powerful to be in the room, and the side conversations that you have and the things that you pick up on are very, very different than on Zoom or on Google Meet or on Microsoft Teams, whatever you're using. It's impossible to get all that information, the information that's necessary and that you really need to understand somebody. I think it's really hard to do it one-dimensionally.
And I do want to actually ask some more detailed questions. So your client base, the institutionals, now that I understand that a little bit better, I mean, you're dealing with people that are they're across all aspects of, call it, the AI adoption spectrum, right? Meaning maybe they have resisted it. Maybe, like 99% of the planet still hasn't subscribe to a $20 a month model. So we are early, but we're moving faster than anything people can comprehend. And so they're going to get drug in, whether we like it or not. It's kind of an inevitability. And I always say the cement's wet, so you can put your fingers in it still. So you may as well, right? Figure out what your little going to be. But it's been poured. So don't try and think you can unpour it, because it's been poured. And when you're talking about like nonprofits and these things that touch and permeate into other aspects of society, and where the endowments or whatever the things that you're managing can have real impact. Like if things go bad, if they go sideways, you've got to look at it from multiple angles. One, are they allocated in the right place, or is there risk ahead, for where they are? And then operationally, what is our role, or what could we add on as a practice area, maybe, right, to help operationally train?
Yeah, so forever, I think our edge in the institutional space has been to understand the organization we're working with. It's the same kind of theme that we've been talking about today. So what are their stresses? What are their capital inflows like? What's their debt situation? What's the regulatory climate they live in? What keeps them up at night? The same kinds of questions you might ask an individual, family, or whatever are analogous to institutions. You have to understand the ecosystem that the money, if you're managing the endowment, you need to understand the organization, because an endowment technically is a perpetual pool of capital. You don't want a perpetual pool of capital to suddenly become a short-term pool of capital because you didn't understand the organization, their needs, and when they might have to take a bigger draw. So all of those things and stress testing for them and doing scenario analysis have been part of our DNA forever and our culture, because when you come from that business, that's the way you think. There's complicated problems, there are complicated organizations, you're dealing with multiple decision makers. And again, things can change. So we also do work for health systems. It's complex, the regulatory climate there. One thing could really impact them financially in a big way, and you have to understand those things. So I always thought, as I look back on my career and our business, because I was the first, supposedly the Financial Times wrote this, so I'm just going to say it's probably true, but I was the first big practice to come out of the wirehouses to kind of develop the fiduciary model. So at least they credited me and my team with that. And the reason we did that was because we were doing work like this, and you had to be completely objective. You had to solve for the right problems. And a lot of times the solutions didn't reside within a wirehouse bank like Merrill or Goldman or wherever at the time. And I really thought this business is going to go to a fiduciary model. It's going to go to independence. I actually thought when I left what was Smith Barney right before the Morgan Stanley merger, I left. And it was right into the financial crisis, which is a whole nother story. But I thought I was late. I really thought this independence movement, and it took a while, but turns out I was early. And I always say this, so it's being early is a lot like being wrong, because you have to deal with a lot of things that aren't fully the business. Nothing was formed in the independent channel in the fiduciary space in 2008. So that's when I entered it with almost a $6 billion practice, and we didn't even have the right reporting. So we were solving all these complex problems for years. We continue to do the same thing. We just have way better tools. And the first thing, when I finally set up the business with the help of my team, I realized was technology was so powerful. Like, you were stuck in these wirehouse models using legacy systems that didn't talk to each other. And you couldn't effectively deal with clients' problems with the technology we had. And compliance, by the way. Compliance, which in the big firms was always about regulating, the junior broker that entered. And you're doing this really complex stuff. I'm sorry. You're doing this really complex stuff. So, I think it was really eye-opening to be able to create my own thing.
Yeah, I love that you said, when you're early, a lot of times it shows up as you're wrong. And I've learned that way too many different times in different industries across 25 years. And the one thing that I could say about that is that you're right in the macro or in the long term, you're spot on, meaning you're early, but your thesis is right. The thesis has not been disproven, but the roads and the bridges and the railways and the things that get you that inevitability as an operator don't need to exist yet. They don't exist, right? They don't.
It didn't exist at all. None of it. Not the most basic thing.
Right. So it's either way more expensive to kind of get to that customer solution that is the inevitable, obvious thing, or it's physically not possible until somebody else somewhere adjacent invents the thing that creates the road or creates the fiber or the throughput or whatever. And I think what's interesting right now is that the benefit of being early is not only the conviction and all those lessons, but it is the pattern recognition. It's understanding when it's actually time. Because until you've been late or early, you don't really have the context of what's on time. Once you've been early, if you can survive it through any number of practical and pragmatic things, or you can come back and revisit it later because you did something else that was timely, right? While this sat here on the shelf, you have the pattern recognition to see and understand that now it's actually the crest of the wave and it's time to go. And I think
that's a really key thing.
I think that's where we are today, because what people have not yet realized is AI is not a tool set. It's not an incremental improvement, and exponential has been so overused that I don't think people really even listen to it anymore. It's almost like innovation became a platitude, right? It's like exponential means nothing, unprecedented means nothing ever since COVID, because everything was unprecedented. Negative $38 a barrel oil was unprecedented. Like, we've just beat these words to death, and so we tune them out. The truth is that when we invented electricity 100 years ago and made it affordable for everybody that wanted it, we never built structures the same again. And human beings still live and work in structures. And the truth today, simply put, for me, that I'd love for you to react to is, whether it's financial service or whatever, human beings are going to still need to talk to other human beings when it comes to critical decisions around their money, their wealth, their management. And they're still going to probably do that inside of a building. And they're going to need facts and data and things like that. And so when we've electrified or created ubiquitous intelligence, where essentially everybody can be Einstein or better, we still have the need for the space, but we're just never going to architect organizations or client relationships the same again, because we've now rewired everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the opportunity. That's the timing.
Yeah, I think that's what you said about timing, I'll react to that first. That is a really hard thing. You're right. After you've been early or late, or early in my case, a lot, and it does feel like the same as being wrong, and you lose a lot and the infrastructure isn't there, you get better. In investing, I've tried to teach people too, like, you may have this big idea, but you have to get the timing of the idea right too, because if you're too early, it can be a disaster. So I think you get better with that, with the more experience you have, and it's judgment, human judgment. In terms of, people will still need people. We will use these tools to get better. I think the one thing that gets missed in the whole conversation about, technology and AI adoption and AI resiliency in business, or whatever you want to call it, is that humans are wired for companionship and understanding. And we're human, so I think those that win in business will be those people who understand how to use these tools and still connect with people in a deeper and broader way in person. Maybe not all the time, because not everybody wants to, meet in person, but I think that's going to still be a really important thing. And it may be even more important,
Well, I think this is an overplayed analogy. I've said the different ways to different people, but it just keeps working. Is like, dogs in the park like to be around other dogs in the park. And
right.
and in our own way, the difference between us and dogs is that dogs don't know that they know that, right? They know that they're at the park. They know they like being around other dogs. They're happy. They know that you're the owner, I'm the owner. They know that, but they don't know that they know it. We have the ability to know what we know. And so humans are still going to want to be around other humans, and we're going to interact. Whether or not, but the dog doesn't create the park, doesn't create the beach, doesn't maintain the beach, doesn't even know where the beach is, doesn't know how it gets to the beach, just knows there's a car. Like, in other words, doesn't know a lot of things that it benefits from. And it's very hard because humans have been at the top of the food chain, the intelligence chain for so long for us to get around that acceptance of we're not the most powerful thing. But anyone who has a spiritual relationship of any kind with any tradition recognizes that we're pretty small and insignificant and that the universe is a lot more
Yes.
powerful and bigger than us. It doesn't really care what we think. Right. So I think what we're going to have to accept at some level is that a lot of the things that we're designing for right now are not going to be ours to design for anymore. But that doesn't mean that we won't have more, because if you could be a dog in the 80s when we were growing up and coming up, or you could be a dog today, you'd rather be a dog today because dogs today are treated like children, right? Like they're bought clothes, they get to go to sushi restaurants. Like the dogs in the 80s were in the backyard chewing a bone and got one bath a month, you know? So I think, if we can laugh about it a little bit, being human is going to be it's going to be back in style to be human again.
I think there's been a lot of study around that recently, right, Chris, around younger people ditching their phones more and ditching social media more and connecting more. It's just, I think the whole idea that, everybody's going to put on a headset and travel is BS. I mean, my son just was in Japan and this is the one who left his job. He extended for a week and a half. He just said, this is so unbelievable. I'm going to do it. I'm going to, experience it. You can't do that with a headset on. I mean, he met so many people. I won't divulge any of his personal stories, but he met so many people. He had so many great food experiences. He saw so many beautiful things. How do you experience that? It's not the same. You can't.
Right.
He formed new relationships with people that'll probably be friends of his forever, just from going to Japan and extending his trip.
And I think we reorient our values of what we want to use our money for, where we transact it. I think a lot of those things shift, right? Our consumption patterns evolve, they shift, our priorities shift. All those things are natural consequences. Where we get our money from is the big debate. But again, we're trying to solve that through the same lens as we've always solved it. And we'll get there eventually. There will be disruption. But I think when it comes to this transition of wealth, because there's a big transition of wealth from, call it the baby boomer generation down, right? Largest one ever in history.
Yes.
At a time where we're also facing more disruption than any other time in history, right? Like the rules no longer make sense. The world order is shifting. All these macro things coming together with the largest transfer of wealth. What is it that you feel like the client on your side, back to your original thing as we wind up, what do they think the problem is, and what do you know they actually need? And how are those two things different? What have you learned, like running your own thing?
Well, I guess I could just say that I think the most important thing with this transfer of wealth going on and dealing with multi-generational wealth is that if you're in this space and you want advice from someone who's been in it for a few decades or so, I think you have to build a team around you that looks like the client. And the client isn't just someone your age, it's multi-generational advisors and people that are going to interface with the client and adapt and use technology to help serve the client better and more proactively than the next person or firm. So I think being able to solve multiple problems that a client has and make it seamless is the goal that every advisor should have. How do I, this again, wealth doesn't live in a parallel universe. It lives in the ecosystem of the person or the organization. How do I understand that better? How do I put the right people on the team in front of that client? How do I have more touch points that are meaningful to the client, whether that's in person or otherwise, proactively? That's the winning combination. And I think, the thing I will say, I look at a lot of the flaws and I stress test things constantly and try to make them better in life and business. But the one thing I think we've done really, really well is built a multi-generational team. And I'm not the same person who interacts with, the 20-something-year-old son or the grandkid or you have to have more than one person, and they have to meet the client where they're at. With technology, people, you and we may want to meet one-on-one 2 times a year or once a year. Somebody else may want more than that. And the way I deliver advice to you may be more through technology, maybe using, you want to use the portal, you want to see everything on one really easy, in an easy digital experience. You have to understand the person. So it's hard to build a business like this because it is very custom, I guess I would say. And I think the thing
Well,
about
sorry.
technology makes it easier. Technology makes it easier though to do that. And the people who've built businesses with model portfolios and one size fits everybody, I think those are the people that need to be worried, because
Right. Well, and
that's
I
going to
think they
be
are.
disrupted.
I think they are worried, and I think there's like the people that are going to run through the thorn bush in the business and bleed to death over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's going to be maybe 80% that are running that kind of stuff. But they just won't get the next generation, and the people that have always wanted to do what you just said, and knew that that was the right thing, like bring a virtual family office kind of model to someone.
Mhm.
They couldn't justify it. The cost centers were too high. The pieces weren't there. They were
Right.
too early. But when you think about it now as an independent firm, one of the things, the needs that we believe they will identify they have and that we can solve, like, is they now don't have to be a SaaS store wrapped up in a financial advisory practice. Meaning, the way that software was sold for the last 20 years for the venture model was subscription, and humans buy based on one little thing they need, and then 90% of it goes to waste. Well, if you're trying to execute what you just said, yes, technology can get you there, but it can't get you there if you're stapling together a CRM that costs X a month and this that costs that a month, and no one knows how to use any. You got to hire an agency, and then you got to do this. The opportunity now is you get a multi-generational team, and I love that piece. You have the person who's client facing, or the people that are client facing at the different touch points.
Mhm.
And then you have a technical team, and you can build, a 7-8 person shop with 90 to 100 agents that are customized to your look and
Exactly.
feel, to your soul. And that unlocks a whole new opportunity to
It
manage.
does. And it's pretty exciting, actually, when you think about it. What you can do with the interfaces, like using Claude and putting the thing that we're solving for right now, we're trying to solve for, is the confidentiality piece, because you have to redact everything. But it's still like such a time saver, and you can analyze very complex documents and data around a client very easily, where it would have taken man hours of. The point is, it gives you more time to spend on solving the real problems in front of the client versus
Well, and
digging
it
through a
also,
bunch of data.
right, it also gives you the ability to be multi-touch point without having to invest in one versus the other. Meaning, like, if you and I, like you said, want in-person meetings to be 2 hours and over coffee twice a year because that's our generation, that's what we need, that's what we want.
Yeah.
But I need my children on board and whatever with the plan, and they want to go back and forth with an app and chat in real time and do it
Yes,
or 7 or at 2 a.m. Well, now you don't have to make a binary choice. Now there is a
exactly.
way where you can secure that in environment. It is owned by the firm, and it can be a multi-touch point thing that provides the same information in different ways to the people that need it when they need it, and builds a real client experience centric model. And I think that's the unlock. I think that's the exciting part.
That is the unlock, and that is the exciting part. And I think the next 5 years is going to be a super fun time to be in this business if you have that kind of model.
Well, so it sounds like you're going to keep going then. You're not sunsetting the
Yeah, I really, I figure, you stay doing what you love to do. I'm just not, I always joke that I'm useless overhead, really, because business runs without me, but I go where I'm needed. And, if you can stay in your highest and best use, then I don't think you need to really go anywhere. If you become irrelevant, I love the fact that the business works without me. That's been my lifelong goal.
Well, there's never
So,
been a more important time where you as chairwoman, or as like the head of that business, needs to be in the clouds. Like, in other words, there's never been more beneficial time than right now for you to be free and clear of day-to-day responsibilities and the business still works, because mentally the level of engagement and rigor that you're going to put into designing that next iteration
Yeah.
could use all of your time.
Yeah, it's the strategy part. It's really understanding, like, where do you want to be in the next 5 years, and what's it going to take to get there, people wise, process wise, technology wise. And that's what we're spending a lot of time on right now. And that is my job. That's more my job than anything else. Go where I'm needed. I always love talking with clients, and I always love being involved, and I love the investment side, but I think it's really staying at 30,000 feet and trying to solve for that.
Well, it's been awesome to have you share some time with us and our audience. And if they want to get in touch with you, where are the best places, or where do you want them to kind of connect with you? On socials, on LinkedIn, on the website? We'll put it on the show.
Yeah, I'm definitely on LinkedIn. Our website, it's LV, like Victor or Van Dusen, LVW Advisors. And so you can go out there, our domain is out there, and get in touch with us really easily. Our information is all out there, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
They can get the book. I got the book on Kindle. They should get it. And
Yes, Running with Grace. Yeah,
Running
they
with
can get
Grace.
the book and write a review. Love the reviews.
Awesome.
It was a Wall Street Journal bestseller, which I was shocked about. I was shocked. I just I didn't even know I was writing a book. And then I was like, oh, you wrote a book. You should probably publish this. So, but it's a lot of stories that I think it's a way of, it was a big philanthropic project for me to pay forward some of the experiences I've had, because we are all human, and we all go through similar versions of things, and sometimes just need to know that what looks really perfect on the surface is not. we're all more alike, that we're different. So
well, and I think the metaphor of putting one foot in front of the other is the most appropriate advice for everybody today, because there's days where you're overwhelmed, there's days where you feel dread, there's days where you feel unlimited upside, and the reality is just one foot in front of the other.
that's
We'll
right.
get there. So
Exactly.
it's a pleasure having you on. Thank you for being on the Atomic Level, and we'll have to have you back.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that.